Grammarly shouldn't exist. It's almost as if there's never been room for a tool like Grammarly. And yet they've managed to build a $13 billion grammar checking empire. They found their way through the marshes, threading a needle, finding a space between all these competitors, even in today's AI world. Why would someone start a spell check startup when every word processor has one? Why would customers pay for a default feature on every device? And why would anyone pay $30 a month for spell checking when you can generate everything if you just pay the full feature ChatGPT? It's just like $20. Despite all of that, Grammarly not only survives, but thrives. $13 billion in their last valuation, acquiring Coda, another unicorn, and taking on Goliath in the AI productivity space. And there's also somehow surprisingly very little drama on Grammarly's story. And for the founders to become billionaires without upsetting anyone, I think that's a tale worth learning from. And the most obvious answer to Grammarly's success is UX. It's user experience, right? It keeps Grammarly protected against a nasty and a growing list of competitors, which I'm gonna get to. But Grammarly's success also comes from doing non-obvious things. Now, here are 4 things that should not have worked for Grammarly. 4 items that I'm pretty sure many advised against. And the first one being targeting students rather than businesses first. Grammarly was founded by Alex Shevchenko, Mac Litvin, and Dmytro Leider, 3 Ukrainians nationalized as Canadians. And they were a repeat team, by the way. A few years earlier, they founded My Dropbox, a tool for colleges to detect plagiarized papers. This is not to be confused with the Dropbox, of course, which came years later. The first version of Grammarly was a web tool, the Grammarly editor, where you could write and get spell checked. And this was a paid service for students. And considering the tight wallets that students usually have, targeting these guys first would not have been the path I would have chosen. We learned that the hard way with Slidebean and ended up giving up on that audience completely. But if your product is essential to the audience, then people will pay for it. If your life, i.e. your grades, depends on it, well, it may be worth it. But differently, if even a broke student is willing to pay for this tool, maybe you're onto something. And there was an even bigger unexpected win there.
Teachers started recommending Grammarly to students and incorporating our product into their curriculum pretty early on in our evolution, even before we launched our freemium model back in 2015.
Now, another problem in this early version was that they just bet on this web editor instead of leveraging platforms where people are already working. Building a web tool is much easier than just integrating into everything, so naturally they started there, and as soon as they could, they moved that and integrated into Microsoft Word. Up to 1 million users by 2015, which translates into at least 8-digit annual revenue. But then they did the unthinkable. They made the thing free. Freemium.
Go install Grammarly. It takes 2 minutes and it's free.
Try it for free today.
It's free. Try it for free today.
Now, going freemium is probably the riskiest and the most pivotal company decision that they've ever made. But removing the paid barrier, plus integrating Grammarly everywhere with their browser extensions, would take Grammarly from 1 million to 30 million users over the next 5 years. Now, part of that growth was fueled by an intense, inescapable, and sometimes insufferable YouTube ad campaign.
Bazinga!
It's a slam dunk. The meeting's canceled. They'll go home champions.
Well, I appreciate that, Grammarly, but this is an 8! situation.
Def. Totes.
Their YouTube channel has close to 5 billion video views as of writing, and seeing how their organic content usually doesn't perform very well, we can just assume that the vast majority of those views are just of those ads. And if you've ever been part of their targeting, you know how intense it can get.
If you write anything on your computer, you need to get Grammarly.
Grammarly does more than catch errors.
Now, you can read countless studies on these ads and how they followed good practices. They're, of course, well produced. There's a key message. It's delivered under 5 seconds before you can skip the ad. There's a real-time product demo. There's a simple message. But I don't think enough people talk about how they basically brute forced brand awareness. Now, one little secret you might not know about on YouTube ads is that if your video ad is over 30 seconds long, an advertiser will only pay for views past the 30-second mark. In other words, if people skip the ad anytime before the 29th second, the ad essentially ran free. This doesn't apply to shorter ads, which these days are usually non-skippable. After you've seen the ad once, you're unlikely to rewatch it, but the brand awareness is still there, and it's free. Still though, rules are very different when you start to get into the billions of paid views, but I can absolutely guarantee you that whatever their YouTube ads bill was, the economics were profitable. And we know that because this brute force campaign ran when they were still a bootstrap startup. What tech company in this day and age bootstraps to tens of millions of dollars in revenue? Grammarly wouldn't raise any money until 2017, when it raised a $110 million round from Spark Capital. That means that all these crazy YouTube ad campaigns must have had profitable economics. Let's quickly reverse engineer Grammarly's campaigns to determine how much they might have been paying for a conversion. Back in 2017, Grammarly was $29 a month if paid monthly and $140 a year if paid annually. For them to have healthy SaaS metrics enough to raise that round of funding to get investors excited, a user conversion must have cost them no more than $47, a third of the average revenue that they made from a customer the first year. Now, a pretty standard conversion rate from sign up to paid is 3%. So we can maybe infer that a sign-up must have cost them somewhere in the range of $1.50, $1.40. And finally, knowing that YouTube's average cost per view is 7 cents, we can conclude that about 1 out of 20 views were converted to a sign-up, which is a sign of an incredibly effective conversion campaign. Granted, that's 20 views of 30 seconds or more, which might have come from hundreds of 29-second or less ad views, but they didn't have to pay for any of those. Speaking of which, we creators only get about 50% of those 7 cents if an ad appears before our video. And that's why we often complement that with brand deals. And this year, .tech partnered with us to help founders find domain for their startups. If you've ever been domain hunting, you've probably noticed how registering a .com domain in this day and age means settling for some hyphenated, long keyword, weird domain name, which makes your startup really hard for your customers to find. Except now, you can choose to get a .tech domain name for your startup. Over 500,000 tech startups worldwide that have collectively raised over $5 billion in funding are already using .tech domains to make their mark. And the team at .tech is offering you guys a 50% discount on your first year registration if you use the link in the description or in this QR code. Plus, if you purchase a domain or if you already own a .tech domain, you're gonna get free office hours with my team and I to help brainstorm your company pitch deck, your financials, your marketing, or your fundraising strategy. We'll be selecting 2 companies that apply for office hours over the next few weeks, and to register for those one-on-ones, all you need to do is go to callwithcaya.tech. Thanks .tech for helping us make these deep dive videos. Now back to Grammarly, I'm pretty sure that a good chunk of that 2017 round and the rounds following were just primarily to fuel this fire. If the economics of these ads are solid, then all you really need to do is just throw more money at them. Now, 2 years later, they had already raised another $90 million round at a unicorn valuation, and then another $200 million round in 2021, their last reported valuation of $13 billion. According to Forbes, this minted 2 new billionaires since Alex and Max both own 23% of the company, respectively. Now, the company disputes that 23%, but it hasn't released a better number to correct it. Now, this is exactly 1 year before the first ChatGPT released, which went viral in November 2022. Now, generative AI going mainstream probably poses the biggest existential threat that Grammarly has ever faced. But again, Grammarly's biggest moat is user experience, and let me show you how. Now here's a little fragment of today's video script, and I wrote that without any spell checks, without any assistance. So mandatory context, I write a script for these videos, which I am reading off a teleprompter now, but I write it so that it sounds more like a conversation, narration, rather than formal written text. Now these models tend to be optimized for writing, not for YouTube scripts, so they are bound to find issues that make my text inappropriate for formal text. Now Grammarly found 2 clarity suggestions. It wanted me to replace a lot of for many, and to remove essentially, which I think are fair changes for formal text. It also corrected me on the capital T for YouTube, which I always get wrong. But I put this same thing in Pages, Apple Pages, on my Mac, and it found no issues at all. Microsoft's basic spell check only found the YouTube error, and their premium version did find 2 clarity equivalent suggestions. Ironically though, Google Docs, where I actually write most of these scripts, found no problems at all. That means that Google didn't find any issues with my spelling of YouTube, which of course is their very own product. As a matter of fact, until this point in the script, Google Docs has 0 suggestions, while Grammarly had 122. Now there are some obvious wins here. Adopting or rejecting the corrections is a hover plus click action instead of a click plus click action. And when you're doing that hundreds of times in a text, it makes a difference. Now Grammarly is of course universal because it's a browser and now a desktop plugin, so it works everywhere across every app, so you get this unified experience even if you move from one writing platform to the other. But I think more crucially, the spell check tools that these word processors have, they haven't really evolved in years. On the other hand, nearly every platform has a proofread/rewrite function these days, which Grammarly added last year. Now, the problem that I found with proofreading tools is that I get an entirely new piece of text, a new paragraph that I now have to reread. Here are the proofread versions that all major AI writers generated, including Grammarly. Except for ChatGPT, where I had to move the entire thing to a chat conversation, the others all took a similar amount of clicks to generate, and they all generated, I think, decent outputs. But maybe I'm just stubborn, but I think they don't sound like me anymore. They also fix and correct everything at once. But it's these subtleties in writing that matter, and those tend to get lost very easily if the phrasing changes all at once. Sometimes what you need is just a good old spelling and grammar check on what you wrote, especially if you're a foreigner, if you're not a native speaker, you want to learn what you're writing wrong, hopefully not make the same mistake again. Now, the fact that Grammarly still lets you pick if you want to accept or reject each change feels, from a user experience perspective, like a companion rather than a bot that's writing for you. Now, remember my needle thread analogy. When all the platforms have the same features, the tiny differences can set a platform apart. And it looks like Grammarly is kind of protected. It has like a moat around it in that regard. Their employee base isn't slowing down despite massive tech layoffs in the past couple of years. And again, they're merging with Coda to extend their dominion back to web productivity tools. And that's not to say that Grammarly's approach hasn't had issues. This video went viral in 2024 because the school accused the student of using AI to write their paper, but the student alleges that they only used Grammarly.
I turned a paper in, got a 0. I talked to the teacher, the department head, and the dean, and I was unintentionally cheating using Grammarly.
And that's the thing. Only using Grammarly still does constitute using AI. And while some schools consider AI to be a big no-no, others make using Grammarly pretty much mandatory, so what gives? They aren't shy about their AI tech either, but somehow they've managed to remain a beloved platform for academia, for business use, while many of those same users are hating on the generative AI transformation. Their branding seems to live in this very delicate balance of AI that aids but doesn't replace humans, and their PR team has kept every major controversy incredibly well contained. So in a space that gets tighter and more competitive every day, Grammarly has continued to find its way, unlike, say, IBM or GoPro. Go check our videos about them. And also don't forget to sign up for office hours with our team. We'll pick 2 companies with a .tech domain. Catch you on the next one.